Welcome to the module, Receiving Basics. In this module, we will go over the steps needed to conduct Birch Street receiving. Let's review how a purchase order progresses in Birch Street. The buyer creates and submits the purchase order. The purchase order automatically goes through the property's approval routing, where the approvers review and approve the purchase order. The property conducts the physical receiving of the products on the purchase order. Once the physical receiving is done, the Birch Street receiver can conduct the electronic receiving. The Birch Street receivers enter the electronic receiving event into the system based on the physical receiving. This means whatever happened during physical receiving can be replicated during electronic receiving. Matching the physical receiving with the electronic receiving is crucial to ensure the receiving event is documented correctly. Receiving is a critical part of the Birch Street process. It ensures the accuracy of the payment and keeps the supplier accountable. We are going to address the topic of perfect receiving in today's module. A perfect receiving event is when every product ordered on the purchase order is physically received in the exact quantity and at the same price. At Birch Street, we understand not all purchase orders will have a perfect receiving event. Don't worry, we will discuss the various receiving exceptions during the next few modules. But for today, let's focus on the perfect receiving event. Let's use a scenario to discuss the Birch Street receiving steps in detail. In today's example, sous chef Jen created a purchase order for a specialized cake. The cake was delivered today and was physically received via standard property best practice. Let's review the life cycle of this purchase order. At this point, Birch Street has successfully generated and sent the order to the supplier. In turn, the supplier has produced and delivered the product. Now, it's crucial to mark the purchase order as received in the system. For this, a user can go into Birch Street to enter the electronic receiving. John is the chef admin, and he will conduct the electronic receiving in Birch Street. John will click on the purchase order page to initiate the receiving process. John can select the All Purchase Order filter and search for the purchase order he is receiving. John will have a physical document from the supplier to receive against, since the physical receiving is already done. John will have either a packing slip or invoice. All suppliers must include the Birch Street purchase order number on their documentation. This will make it easier for John to find the specific purchase order. The receiver can search by the order fields if the purchase order number is not available. After locating the purchase order, John can select on the purchase order and click on the Receive button. This will bring up the Birch Street receiving screen. There are two tabs on this screen: PO Header Receiving and Line Items. The PO Header Receiving tab will auto-populate basic purchase order information. John will need to input the required receive date field for this purchase order. There are other optional fields like invoice number, date, amount, and freight fields. For today's example, John will leave these optional fields blank. John will click on the Line Items tab next. John will see all the items on the purchase order displayed here. all John has to do is input the accepted quantity and invoiced price fields accordingly here. In today's example, there is only one item on the purchase order. John will input the quantity of 1. The invoice price will automatically populate as per the original purchase order price. John has the option to change the pricing if the invoice price was different. Since we are conducting a perfect receiving event, John will leave the price as it is. For a perfect receiving event, John also has the option to check the Receive Accept All checkbox. This will mark the Receive Accept All checkbox for every line item, which means the quantity and price matched perfectly with the original purchase order. The quantity and price will automatically populate after clicking the checkbox. Please be careful and only check this when the purchase order's quantity and price matches perfectly with the receiving documentation. To finalize the receiving event, John will click on the Receive button on the top of the screen. He will receive a pop-up message notifying him the process is done. John can review his receiving event by clicking on the Receiving Record button. This screen displays the details of the receiving event and compares it side by side with the original purchase order information. John can print this page out for his reference if needed. This purchase order is now received in Birch Street. John has completed the electronic receiving. The cake purchase order is now at the Receiving Complete status on the purchase order page. Let us summarize what we have learned so far. Birch Street electronic receiving must be completed after the physical receiving. The Birch Street purchase order number is critical for receiving. Please make sure all suppliers include this on their documentation. The Receive button on the PO page will access the receiving screen. The Receive Date field is required on the Purchase Order Header Receiving tab. The Receive Accept All checkbox should only be used when there is a perfect receiving event. A perfect receiving event is when the order quantity and price matches exactly with the original purchase order's quantity and price. Make sure to click on the Receive button on the receiving screen to finalize the receiving event. The Receiving Record button on the receiving screen will display the details of the receiving event.